Today we begin with Marisa's story. Before we dive into courts, clinicians, tactics, and complexities, we need to understand the human side of this. What it feels like when your role as a parent is severed by something invisible, unspoken, and too often misunderstood. This episode is not about theory, it's about the truth. Let's start where this began for you, Marisa. Not only with the legal terms or court battles, but with the emotion. Do you remember the first time you felt something was deeply wrong with your relationship with your kids? And what was that moment or feeling?
Yeah. What I can say is it wasn't exactly one specific time and place. It was a series of times and a gradual change in my children. I would say it's a memory. It still lives in my body, more so than my mind. It was a series of changes, the way that my sons acted towards me that were just completely uncharacteristic of our relationship prior to the separation of my ex-husband. It wasn't one big dramatic finale. And I think that's how parental alienation is. It's just a series of events that just build upon themselves that can become so devastating. I would say I was in denial at first that the behavior presented more like strangers than the children I loved. And it's something that's really hard to grasp as a parent when your child is being systematically turned against you. So I think it's only natural that the first emotion you have is denial, that you think that this can't be possibly happening. I'll say I remember feeling confused at first and then deeply unsettled and eventually afraid. Not of my children necessarily, but how they were tightly being manipulated and controlled. I couldn't control what was being said to them and the ultimatums that they were likely hearing behind closed doors. And that's a type of terror that's really hard to put into words at times.
At what point did you realize this wasn't just a messy divorce, that something much more harmful was happening? Was there a turning point?
Yeah. Not to get into too many specifics, but when the lawfare began, when my ex-husband and his family began using the legal loopholes in the court system and accusing me of horrific accusations, not just to destroy myself, but to destroy my career, not just to destroy my relationship with my children. That's when I realized that I couldn't just sit back and be hopeful and just think he's being bitter and he'll come around and ration will speak. When I realized quickly that I had to hire an attorney, that's when it became very apparent to me that this was much more than just an acrimonious divorce.
The term parental alienation, when did you first come across it? And what was the reaction when you realized it described your situation? And what was the biggest relief or perhaps the biggest fear when you finally put a name to it?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I would say it became apparent to me, the term parental alienation, and that's the challenging thing about this. When I was experiencing this, I was in denial. I didn't really understand what was happening. So when I went and I had the first meeting with my attorney, and my attorney had been in practice for over 20 years, he used the term alienation. And he said that this is something that family law attorneys in the court system, they see all the time, but it's something that's really hard to litigate and prove. So he immediately, it was validating to me that there was terminology for what I was experiencing. But at the same time, it was equally terrifying to me because what he was explaining really, what I'll say is it made me realize how dire my circumstances were and how urgent it was to try and do something.
You've described this experience as kind of a living grief. Can you talk about what it felt like emotionally, day to day, to be cut off from your children while the world kept moving on? And can you share maybe a specific memory or daily struggle that exemplifies this living grief?
Yeah, this is something that still is really challenging for me to speak of, because I still have to function day to day. I have to take care of myself. So at times I have to compartmentalize what I'm experiencing and what I'm feeling. But there's not a day that doesn't go by that it doesn't haunt me. I don't consider, there's not an hour that I don't think about it. I would say it's a grief without closure. It's the kind that doesn't come with a funeral or a goodbye. Holidays and birthdays are exceptionally challenging. I still struggle with knowing that I'm so thankful that I escaped such a toxic and abusive marriage. Yet there's times where I wonder if the price I paid was too high, if I should have just stayed and sacrificed myself. What I can say is no one should have to, and this issue and this phenomena and this type of underrecognized abuse, it's so much bigger than just myself. But no one should have to endure what this is. No parent and no child. It's the kind of grief that those who haven't experienced it, I think, have a hard time understanding it. How this could happen, and I can say is I was once one of those parents. If I heard that a parent was estranged from their child, it's easy to rationalize and draw the conclusions that there's something that parent must have done wrong. They must have been neglectful or abusive or not caring enough. It's because by default, we always give children the benefit of the doubt. And so my presumptions I once had before I really understood what parental alienation was, they affect me sometimes and the way that I assume people will perceive me, and in a way that just amplifies the grief because at times I feel like I felt like I'm in this all alone and that no one can possibly understand what I'm experiencing.
Were there moments when you questioned your own sanity or felt gaslit by people or systems you were expected to protect you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There were moments where you can't help but be reflective. And when you're trying to heal and trying to, I think it's human nature to try to understand why this has happened and how it got so far and what I could have done to change it or alter the course of the trajectory of my life and my children's lives. And there's moments whether I question, the accusations and the lawfare that was waged against me and the allegations that were pursued within the court system were pretty heinous. And there were times where I thought, what did I do that could have prevented this? And are there points in time that I can't recall and I can't remember? And the truth is, I think that's what parental alienation does. I think it's purposely, it's what I can say is the accusers and the people who alienate, they do this purposely. It's a systematic approach to try to humiliate you and change your perception of who you are. And at times they were successful. Absolutely. And the legal system, I think too, it's incumbent upon them to pursue every accusation for the children's safety. And I can't say they're at fault, but at times the time frame that it takes for them to clear somebody and the investigation time when you're not seeing your children on a daily basis, it can feel like an eternity, and that doesn't help your mental health.
How did people around you, friends, professionals, maybe even family, respond when you tried to explain what was happening?
I had a variety of mixed emotions, and I learned quickly, and I already knew this from working in healthcare, that there's a time and a place for everything, and you have to know your audience. And from working in in hospital systems, I'm surrounded by a lot of educated people, and in the emergency department specifically, we're exposed to dysfunction on a daily basis. And what's amazed me is the quantity of highly educated professionals who really didn't understand or know what it was. And when I would try to broach the subject, I think it's an uncomfortable subject because it elicits more questions than answers from people, as it should. So they start asking questions that are almost accusatory of me. Well, how come you don't see your children? How did you let this happen? And I can't blame those people for asking those questions, because I was once one of those people that was incumbent upon me to ask those series of questions as to how you got here. There was a time when it was acutely happening to me that I wasn't prepared to answer those questions in a way that was, I don't want to say convincing, but a way that eloquently described what was happening, because I was so bereft, I was so traumatized that I would have presented as someone who was difficult to believe, because I was experiencing so much grief. So it would have been hard to follow the point I was trying to make. So I didn't bring it up. I learned quickly not to bring it up and to be quiet about it. But what I'll say is, what I learned through that experience is there was such a knowledge deficit in healthcare specifically about it, that it was eye-opening to me. But at the same time, there was also a fair share of people who I experienced that was surprising, where they chimed in. They said, yes, part of my childhood was my mother was very bitter. And there was a number of years, as an example, she wouldn't let me see my father. And it bothers me to this day. And there were a lot of people who shared their stories, surprisingly, that clearly were the very definition of parental alienation that they had lived through. And they were surprised that I was experiencing it. Yet they weren't surprised that some of the responses I got were, this kind of thing happens so often, and people don't recognize it.
Thank you that you are, so brave, Marisa. I know this conversation is hard for you. One more question regarding that. Do you remember what was the most unhelpful or most helpful response you received from these professionals or family or people around you?
What I can say is, when people respond, they always, first of all, they're whether or not it's helpful advice, they're trying their best to help you. So I think a lot of people, regardless of the response and how helpful it was, their intent was good. It was positive. So I can't be bitter about that, whether or not the advice helped me or not. At times when I was, as an example, there were just attacks and allegations, and my children were being held from me. And I was experiencing so much grief and despair and trying to keep my head up. At times I received advice such as forgiveness. You should forgive because you can't let the bitterness erode who you are. You don't want to become that person that's angry and bitter with life. So you have to find it in yourself to forgive. And that is very relevant and valid advice for most things. I completely understand that. But when you are under assault, at times, that's the last thing you want to hear. What I can say is, parents who are being alienated from the children, they should always strive. This is just my experience, in my opinion. If the goal is to reconvene and heal the relationship you have with your children, of course you should, regardless of what was said or what happened, you should always find a way to forgive your children. But I don't know that finding a way to forgive the people that purposefully alienate you from your children is the right answer in this case.
There's a lot of stigma around speaking publicly about parental alienation. What made you decide, I need to use my voice?
That's a good question. And that's something that unfortunately took me way too long to come to the conclusion. And it's something I really, really struggled, because it's such a multifaceted issue. But the truth is, silence was never safety for me. It became a prison that I was living in daily, that only became more unbearable and suffocating as the days and the weeks and the months ticked by. For a long time, I kept quiet. I was afraid of being judged, afraid my credibility would be questioned, afraid of being called bitter, unstable, emotional. And I mean, at times I was those things, bitter, unstable, and emotional, because how could you not be? And I also recognized there was a time and a place where I was capable of speaking publicly, and there was a time that I wasn't ready. I also thought if I said less, my children would get over it and just realize and break free of the control. But silence, it never stopped the abuse. It just made it easier for my ex and his family to become even bolder with their accusations and lies. I realized the longer I stayed quiet, the more I became complicit in my own erasure. And really, it was contributing to the problem, not solving it for myself, and certainly not solving it for other people. I came to this conclusion one day as another holiday ticked by, and I texted my son about his birthday, and his response back to me was in quotations of what someone told him to say in the text message. It was clearly not the language of my son. That was, when you asked me earlier about a turning point, I would say that was one of them recently, when I knew that every text message was being monitored. I thought if I was going to be judged either way, I'd rather be judged for telling the truth. So I started speaking, not because I have all the answers, but because someone else needed to hear the words that I once needed myself that I couldn't find. And I think accountability, I need, throughout this process, I'm always looking for peace and for closure, which I may never have in some regards. But I can't help but want accountability, because parental alienation, it's never going to get resolved, and it's not going to end in silence.
Thank you, Marisa. You're not only a mother, but also a registered nurse. How did your background in healthcare shape the way you processed this trauma?
It's funny, because I can't help but be a nurse. I can't help but look at the lens through that of a nurse, and one that works in the ER, that is exposed to patients with significant psychiatric issues on a regular basis. So at times, interestingly enough, you might think that helped me, but in some ways it hindered me in a lot of ways. And I can't speak for everyone that works in an emergency room specifically, but what I can say is, with over a decade of experience as an ER nurse in a variety of emergency rooms in Pennsylvania, I developed this deep skepticism towards emotional sensationalism. I'd say, to further describe this, some might say this, it could be characterized as victim signaling or trauma dumping, or just simply put, people seeking attention-seeking behavior. And over the years, of course, I've seen what crisis really looks like. And I've also witnessed how some people misuse this for secondary gain in attention-seeking matters. And it's one of the reasons I've been hesitant, because I was ashamed to speak about it openly, about my story. I feared it would be misinterpreted for self-pity or attention-seeking behavior or revenge, because of how bitter my divorce was. There's so many factors, and I tried to evaluate this through the lens of other people, of how they would perceive this and receive this information. In some ways I was fearful. I mean, there's a reason why I left and my ex, and I was fearful of what would come if I started speaking out from him and his family. I didn't want to hurt my children further. I didn't know if this was the right answer for them. So there were many times where I thought I would sacrifice myself in some ways again. And I didn't want to do anything that would bring shame or shine an unfavorable light upon them, because they don't deserve this. They're victims in this. So what I can say is there's so many emotions and varying concerns I still have. But what I can say is, in some ways, I also didn't want to give satisfaction to those who tried to destroy me, that in the knowledge that they have hurt me as much as they have. So it's such a complex issue. But ultimately, I realized that silence was only emboldening those to continue the behavior and continue hurting my children and hurting me. And It allows systems, legal and medical alike, to continue to fill families just like mine. What I've endured, it's nearly broke me. And that's another fear by me saying that. I don't want to come across as someone who's just looking for sympathy and a pity party. But what haunts me the most is there's so many survivors I've found, and I've come across people who've suffered the same things as myself, if not worse. And what I can say is, while we continue to debate whether or not this really exists, parental alienation, and argue over the terminology, the failure to name this within the healthcare system, it just feels like an atrocity to me. And I can't remain silent any longer.
Thank you for sharing, Marisa. This really leads to the next question I have here for you. You know, some people fear that telling their story sounds like playing victim or airing dirty laundry.
Yeah.
What would you say to someone listening who feels that fear, but also feels invisible?
I would say, and this is why I'm here now, is I had those exact fears. That was one of the things that really was a predominant factor in what made me stay silent so long, because there was a point in time where I couldn't take that criticism, because that's exactly why I was staying silent. And I would say, when you're quiet about it, it just perpetuates the problem, and it gives power to those that continuously seek to hurt you, and not just you, but others. You become complicit in the problem. And that's one thing I've learned the hard way. And I hope that my presence here and now empowers other people to come out and to speak up.
Sure, it will. Marisa, what future do you imagine if more people understood what parental alienation really is? And what's the bigger mission behind this show?
Very loaded question, and thank you for asking that. I would say, if we acknowledge parental alienation as a public health crisis like it is, we'd start to see policy shifts, mandatory training for family court judges, updated DSM criteria, trauma-informed custody evaluations. I've done so much research on this topic, and it was part of my healing process, and it's still a work in progress. But studies have shown that children affected by parental alienation are more likely to suffer from depression, anxiety, attachment disorders well into adulthood. It's not just a private issue. It's just not an individual family issue. It becomes a generational crisis where dysfunction and abuse are allowed to proliferate. The future I imagine is one where parents no longer feel erased, such as I have. Dismissed. I felt dismissed. I felt shamed into silence, which I know I've said multiple times here. And that is such an overpowering feeling that I never thought I never could understand what that felt like. And now when I encounter survivors of different types of abuse, I have a whole nother perspective on empathy. I think if more people understood what parental alienation is, survivors wouldn't feel compelled to educate every professional they encounter. Parents won't feel ashamed to speak out like I have. We'd have more community support. We'd have clinical definitions, legal recognition that protect families before the damage becomes irreversible, which it can. Understanding is the first step. Once people can name it, they can stop normalizing it or dismissing it as just another high conflict custody dispute. And that's where change begins. Because the truth is, if you can't name it, if you can't put a name towards it in the healthcare system and illegally, then you can't prevent it. You can't identify it. You can't mitigate it. You can't help those who need the help the most.
What you just heard is the painful truth most people never see, but that millions live. In the episodes to come, we're going to name the patterns, meet the experts, and guide you toward healing. But we had to start here with the heart of it all. Thank you, Marisa, for your courage.